Welcome back to M&A in the Trades. I'm your host, Yassin Shaar, joined by my co-host, as always, Gyner Ozgul. Gyner, how are you doing today?
Good, Yassin. Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. I appreciate always your presence and the wisdom that you bring into these conversations, especially in today's episode where we're diving into one of probably the most challenging aspects of M&A, and that is technology due diligence. And many acquisitions, as you know, Gyner, technology often feels like a black box with hidden risks and uncertainties that can really jeopardize the success of the deal. And as more companies move to more digital infrastructure and digitize critical aspects of their operation, especially the work order lifecycle, failing to properly assess the technology of an acquisition can lead to costly surprises after everything is said and done. So, to help us open up this black box and navigate the complexities of technology due diligence, we're joined by Hutton Henry from Beyond M&A, who's an expert in technology due diligence. So, Hutton, welcome to the show, my man.
Hi, thanks Yassin. Thanks for the intro, and good to see you, Gyner. So I don't know about the word expert in technology, but I definitely. It's an interesting place to be. So
Absolutely. And so, Hutton, before we get started, why don't you share with us a little bit about your background and your work at Beyond M&A?
yeah, sure. So I taught myself to code at the age of 8. I
Wow.
started to work for Ford when
Mm,
I was very young, 16, and I worked
mm,
on my first project where Ford bought Jaguar, and it was
mm,
a huge M&A project.
hmm,
And I started to learn from that very young age that we have technology on one side, but the real problems are people. And it's
mm.
been a theme throughout my 30-odd year career. So,
Interesting.
to give the context in this conversation, I've been working with private equity since 2015.
Mm,
We sort of look at 5 to 7 deals a month at different companies, 50% professional services, 50% SaaS. So gives us the view of
beautiful.
IT and technology. Yeah.
Absolutely. So as you are going about, doing conducting a technology due diligence, M&A transaction, what seems to be the hidden risks if it's not done properly? Like, can you walk us through, what happens if companies fail to look inside this, black box of technology during an acquisition from your experience?
Sure. I think, well, I mean, the obvious one is unexpected costs, but what does that really
Hmm.
mean? And I think if you're a business owner, the knock on your EBITDA, because if we find
Hmm.
something that you could have fixed yourself, it's quite annoying after you're going through your negotiations. So I look at it on both sides. On the
Hmm.
investor side, what they might have as an issue in terms of expenditure, broken processes, delivery to customer. Probably one of the
Hmm.
biggest things we see is order to cash systems.
Mm-hmm.
Not very clear from end to end, and not
Yeah.
bringing in revenue quick enough is one of the most common things. And in professional services and services firms, sort of systems that are built to be driven by the business, but
Mm.
they have issues in terms of cyber, data going everywhere, and really the focus on revenue generation, but not protecting the business and data. So
Mm.
I
I
think
see Giner nodding his head. So Giner, I'm going to turn it over to you. Have you experienced situations where maybe missing key technology issues during due diligence impacted the success of an acquisition? Can you maybe share any war stories where this black box caused some issues?
I think Hutton's right. I think for me, there's two things that he said that resonated. One is where the owner recognizes post close that there was a gap that they could have got
Mm.
for. Like there's like real financial mechanics here that you find
Hmm.
out, right? So you close and your technology experts kind of swoop in and they do an analysis and all of a sudden they're like, hey, you were having gross profit leakage of $100,000 a year because your system was undervaluing something by $10, a
Wow.
unit. And like that's real. That happens
Hmm.
almost every single time we find
Hmm.
something like that, right? And and that might not seem like a lot, but when you're getting paid as an owner as a multiple of EBITDA, that 100,000 in EBITDA is not 100,000 that you didn't get paid. It's 5, 6, 700,000 you didn't get paid, right? So we have definitely found plenty of those, and that's a very astute point. The other thing is, I like to say to people, like, your data in this environment today, any business that says data isn't part of my business is disillusioned. Because
what do you mean by that?
You're generating data whether you like to acknowledge it or not. Every time you issue, the simplest version of that is every time you issue an invoice out of QuickBooks, if you're an individual owner, right, there's data that's being generated on that invoice that goes somewhere into an ether, right? And the fact that you haven't put controls on it as an owner means that somebody can use that data however they want to use that data. Now, they may not use your company directly because they haven't asked for that. But invoice values, products you're selling, turn of those products, SKU numbers, all that ends up becoming public information for someone to sell if you don't take the chance upstream to kind of put the parameters around it yourself. So I think those, from what Hutton said, those two things, definitely resonate.
I definitely add to that. Is that okay?
Go ahead, Hutton.
Just to add to that is there's such a footprint that you leave out there, and one of the first things we do before we even talk to a company, we'll talk to the investor, find out their investment thesis, and the first thing we do is put one of my cyber guys out there, and they don't look at cyber, they look at the behavior of the business. How are you registered on the internet? What companies have you opened and closed? We're looking for behavior.
Footprint, and digital footprint.
Absolutely. And your footprint tells us an awful lot about how neat your company is inside. So you're leaving that trail of data in every aspect you're doing, but you're doing it over, however long you've owned that business. And so we look for historical thinking and behavior before we meet management. And there's a rule within our team, which is if you're messy on the outside, you're definitely going to be messy on the inside.
So what's the tell signs then, Hutton? Like, what messiness signs are you looking for that could tell you, okay, there's probably some, things we need. Maybe you wouldn't be able to tell exactly what it is, but like it's a giveaway that, okay, we probably need to investigate further here. So what are those tell signs?
So we'll look at the founding team, management team, for all of their appointments, how many companies they're involved with. So that gives us focus, number one. How many companies opened and shut over the period of time. We'll look for loans and sort of money that's outstanding on the business. So they're the basic business aspects. Then on the technology front, most services businesses don't tend to have internal IT. They use an MSP. So we'll check the MSP. We will check if there's any leakage from your business. We'll also check if your email accounts have been hacked. There's so many indicators, and they just come down to the focus of the founder, the management team, or the owner. So.
And what are some of the most common technology, data, security issues that surface during due diligence and M&A? Like, are there any red flags you frequently encounter when examining the technology infrastructure of a target company that you go to your investor and say, you know what, I found this, you should probably close the books on this?
I mean, there's very minimal that we see that will close a deal, or there's always money that can be spent to fix a problem, but it will come off the deal cost, right? But the number one thing is they're thinking about data and protection. When we meet an owner founder and he or she has been so focused on generating revenue, and we will test them with questions and with this outside in on what they're thinking around protecting their customers' data. Because really, this isn't about the company you're buying, it's about the big ecosystem of customers and how you protect them and their journey. So I'll give you two examples because that will put it in context. We've met possibly one of the best sort of building manufacturing companies, and they're built by buy and build loads of businesses. And to be honest, we thought there were so many acquisitions, we were going to find lots of little holes. And there was an IT guy there, and he was really quiet, so that wasn't a good sign initially. And you know what? It was clean. They had blocked every hole, they connected everything up. Then we go to another business, and there was sort of collecting information about power for buildings and helping people save electricity. And the owner's like, well, you know, they'll never, hackers will never look at us because we're not that interesting. And it's a little word. So on the outside, we could see that there were ways of finding data. And then when we challenged them with one question, you can tell the attitude. And the deal didn't go through in that scenario because, you know, it's sort of the liability is 10 years of not really worrying about these things.
So then, Gyner, how do you think about the liabilities? Like have you ever killed a deal because of like the technology liability, or the technology infrastructure was not suited to like fit into your architecture? Like how do you think about the technology risks as you are acquiring a company?
No, I'm not.
Red flags.
Just to be clear, I'll set aside the software space because I think there's material risk if you get into technology companies that are buying technology companies that impact some level of valuation there to a point of a detriment. In services businesses, typically, or B2B businesses that are non-technology core focused, they have technology, it's not a core. It's more a mechanics of the purchase price than it is anything, right? So if we do find something material, then what is it going to cost us to fix it? How quickly can we fix it? And how much does that impact the purchase price, right? And when I say material, you know, in the grand scheme of things, $50,000 might not be material, right? If you're doing a $20 million purchase price deal and you find a $50,000 problem, it's almost a qualitative decision on whether or not you want to even bring that forward to the owner and impact the purchase price. You may just say, hey, for the sake of the deal and the value I think this deal can drive to the organization as a whole, I'm acknowledging the risk. I'll put a plan in place right after close to get that resolved, but I'm going to move forward, right? So it's more a qualitative decision in B2B services businesses. But when you get into the technology space, I'm a little blind there. I would assume there could be scenarios in technology kind of where two technology businesses are combining, where a deal might fall apart if the technology stack doesn't represent what it's supposed to.
Right. So you don't typically kill a deal based on a technology assessment. It's more of a factor of, am I going to, you know, cut back on some of the purchase price because I have some technical debt or technical issues that I have to deal with.
Well, one thing to consider is so that, you know, I have to catch myself so this isn't all negative discussion. Sometimes what you find in technology is opportunity for upside too, right? Just to be really clear, right? You go into technology and you find risks, but sometimes the risks are more opportunity risks than they are risks to the detriment of the business. Giving an example, there are many times where we found gross profit problems in the technology, where pricing wasn't being held firm, or standard costs. There wasn't a great process to maintain costs in the business, things like that, where it's like, you may not even disclose it honestly to the owner because you see that as upside for yourself on day one because you know you have the capabilities to fix
low-hanging fruit,
right? It's low-hanging fruit, but it's material, right? You end up finding, you know, a couple $100,000, if not several million of gross profit upside, or let's just say contribution margin upside, and it dynamically changes the P&L because essentially now to your investors you're saying, I didn't really buy that at 5 times, I bought it at 4.5, right? Within 30 days I resolved this problem that I had identified in diligence, which is now causing us to get better profits out of the business.
Love it. So then, Hutton, for companies entering the M&A process, such as Gyner, what are the best ways to prepare for technology due diligence? Like, how can they ensure that they are ready to open up that black box and evaluate the technology of the target company?
Sure, sure. So in terms of buying, you mean to acquire a
Yeah,
business? Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
great. So I mean, one of the best opportunities there is that most companies, definitely services companies, are really poor at showing how much of value attribution. So they spent this amount of money to
Hmm,
create this extra value, and that is definitely the buyer's opportunity. So it's
hmm,
really worth looking at some of the expenditure they put in. We've looked at an accountancy recently, sort of providing some services around, and they literally went from pen and paper to digital, which sounds crazy in
hmm.
this age, but it was to
It's not too crazy in our world, I can tell
yeah.
you that.
And but it's like you just so the things we're looking for really is that historical decision making, good business initiatives to create value, and to be very specific, it's always going to be at the people, the tech, and the cyber. Right, for services businesses, the um, the whole thing around um, making sure. I mean, cyber is probably the one area that I would always go back to, but it's probably 50% of the issues we find. And so I would say it's those three. People, obviously, it depends whether you hire those people or if you've outsourced. We have seen
Hmm,
situations where outsourcers have either been acquired themselves,
hmm,
or they've started to cause issues because they've moved some of their own operations offshore, and the
hmm.
services company hasn't been aware. So they're quite really important things to look at, is the whole sort of supply chain and how secure it is.
So do you often find service companies having their IT outsourced? And when you do, like, what are the risks that, like, come to your mind? It's like, okay, this is something I need to investigate if they have XYZ. So what should company even getting ready to get acquired? Uh, what should they demand from their vendors to make sure that they
Yeah,
got
yeah.
everything buttoned up?
It's really interesting, right? Because so yes, a lot outsource their IT because they want to get rid of the pain, but we don't know how much pain the supplier has, and their business model is about making things as cheap as possible and to charge as much as possible,
Mm,
right? So basically, yes, you outsource the problem, but you don't own it, and you don't own the security aspect. So there's like a top 10 questions that we have that can tell us very quickly if it's investable. Um, but there's even simple things like asking if the IT MSP uses a lawyer for their legal contracts, because
hmm.
many will not do that. Right, they'll get something off a website, a pack off the website, fill it all in, and
Like
of
an
course,
MSA, like, for example,
yeah,
like a
like
master service
so
agreement of sorts.
yeah, that kind of thing. But an IT MSP is looking after your people, your data, your customers' data,
Mm,
everything, and so it's quite a common practice that they're not, depending on the size of the business, they're not using a legal company. So it's
mm,
so to me, it's one of the quickest indicators of the quality of that firm and whether you
mm.
need to dig in deeper. So,
Right.
can I have an awareness of the company you're using for your legal procedures? So,
Mm.
um, because we can get into a lot of technical detail, but that's never going to help, right? If we want to know people's practices.
That's actually, I hadn't thought of that, Hutton. That whole legal piece of this. That's really really good insight. To understand how they think about the legal piece of their kind of their legal expertise, because it's really important, right? Because you're giving the keys to that MSA or MSP, sorry. You're giving the
Yeah,
MSP the keys to your technology stack, and you're saying, hey, you're in charge of this for me, because essentially with MSPs we're outsourcing a good chunk of our technology because we're not
yeah,
scaled to the point where we can bring it in house yet, right?
yeah,
And we don't think about that legal piece of it all that much. I mean, That's really, really good insight.
And what are you looking for in that legal place? Like, how do they handle my information? How do they set me up on the network? Like sharing of data? Like, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for a really simple bit of behavior, which is, are you protecting my business with care? Right. And that is, if you care, you will go to a lawyer. If you don't care, you'll go to ChatGPT and generate
Right. So it shows just the overall thought process and
yeah,
how customer obsessed they are and really
yeah,
protective. Yes, I see
yeah,
what you mean.
and
So it's
and
more of
and,
an
and
indication of a
yeah,
mindset, of a way of doing business than anything else.
yeah. The second thing I would look out for is if the MSP has been part of a buy and build, in particular if they've been acquired. Now, working, we work for private equity, and that sounds like a strange thing to say, but once the small business has been acquired, is it going to have the same level of quality? And I don't know if you feel the same, Gyner, but the fact is, most of us buy firms, and we have to leave them running for a period before we
Yes,
can bring them in, and
that's
that
right.
is the most vulnerable period, right? Because in my view, there is, and I'm really passionate about this. Once a deal has gone over the line, we mustn't shout about it, because that first 2 months, that smaller company you bought is way more vulnerable than it was before the deal, because
Yeah.
all the management have to get to new governments. They've got new reporting. They have to work at a faster pace. They've got all these new procedures, and while they're doing all this new stuff, underneath it all, they're not looking after IT as well.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree with that, Hutton. And that's a really astute observation. Maybe taking that a little bit further, when we buy companies, sometimes we trip ourselves up in the conversation that everything's going to be better to that company. Like, hey,
yeah,
you're joining an aggregate organization, you're going to have all the support, everything's going to be wonderful. But all you do, I'm going to oversimplify, and this is in every case, so don't take offense to my private equity partners around the world hearing this today. But the first, let's just say 3 to 6 months for the company that's been acquired, we are the most vulnerable. But that team, all we've done is add work to their base. We haven't optimized it yet, right? And you're right, we're totally exposed, because if they have something going on in their technology stack that we're unaware of that's nefarious, let's just say, then it not only exposes the company you just bought, now it's exposing the aggregate of the parent business, So I agree with you. Sometimes we're really quick to put the announcement out, hey, we bought this company, the world is great.
It's a risk, yeah.
Yeah, and then 45 days later, you find out, and by the way, true story, one of my past acquisitions in a previous company, we bought them, and they had a very simple website, right? Well, we didn't know that somebody had hacked the website, right? Until like 5 months later, I think it was.
Wow.
And one of the hyperlinks in the website where you were just clicking here for some customer service is a very small, right, thing. It would take you to an external website that was pornographic, right? I mean, we didn't know. It was just, it was one of the 50 links that you click on in the site that someone had gone in there and had inserted some code, right? Now, once we found out about it, we were quick to turn it off, but for the better part of 5 months, whoever clicked on that.
And what was the vulnerability there, Gyner? Is it that like they had like their website hosted like on some like God knows what server, or like were you able to uncover the root cause?
Well, the root cause was they had a friend of a friend build their website.
Right.
And it was hosted on some really cheap service like GoDaddy. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're an entrepreneur, right? But then essentially it was a one and done. Most of these entrepreneurs treat these websites as, I did it one time, it checks the box, right? And then they forget about it. So in the meantime, Hutton's earlier in this conversation where Hutton said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing a little, Hutton, like, they don't think of it as a big deal. Like, they don't really come after me as a small entrepreneur. Hackers won't. Well,
when you're acquired, they're looking at exactly your type of company.
Yeah, I mean, but in this case, you had a little $10 million company that probably for years and years had this nefarious code on their website, and people were clicking on it hundreds of times, and nobody thought to complain to the owner. And now his image was like
tarnished,
dirty, right?
Yeah.
We fixed it again right away, but I mean, what Hutton said is dead on with something.
What else do you find when you look at companies?
From a technology standpoint, well, I'll tell you, hardware is all over the place, right? And people don't think that's a big deal, but it is a big deal. When you got computers that are on Windows 7 that's unsupported by Microsoft, or I should better say, if you're a larger organization, you can have it supported externally by vendors, but most of these owners don't do that. And you have Windows 7 to Windows 11, no one's really checking the security patches, getting antivirus in place. There's no firewall, there's no VPN, right? And you see the vulnerabilities of that, it terrifies you on day one. Like on day one, you're like, we got to get these guys all on something the same and under control, right? Because we don't know what goes on. Hardware terrifies me. They're on iOS, they're on Android. Some people go to, and look, we're not talking about someone buys the new iPhone every year or buys the new Samsung every year. Some of these Androids are the ones that they're buying for $30 out of the bin, right? And they're using them on your networks, right? And they have malicious software on them. They don't know it. And all of a sudden you get hacked. Or, you're wondering why you get so many texts that act like you as the CEO asking your admin to send $500.
They spoof your email,
right?
They spoof your email address,
What I try to tell people is those are all exploits typically of hardware, right? And really the software within the hardware, but effectively that's where that happens, right? Because you've allowed an entry point, a simple entry point into your technical infrastructure.
So, Gyner, did you bring in third-party consultants to help you or to assist you with your technology due diligence during your acquisition, or did you have it in-house? Like, how did you go about it?
Yes and yes. Early on, when we were first kind of building the platform of the business, we had a lot of consultants because we didn't have an internal IT. Later, it was more our IT department, right? We did use some external specifically for security testing. Just because
like pen tests and stuff,
you can never have enough security in-house, and that space evolves so quickly that externals, it's worth the investment to have the externals come in and do a little bit of penetration testing and help you understand where you're vulnerable. It's really money well spent.
Makes sense. And so then, Hutton, so what are some of the best practices for ensuring that technology due diligence is conducted effectively in an M&A process? Like, how can companies avoid all of these common mistakes when evaluating the technology of the target business?
So these are usually things they can fix themselves, right? But I think as Gyner was saying, the problem is that these small owner-managed businesses don't really want to spend the money, and they want to increase the value of their business. So they think, so this is the number one thing, right? They think by reducing my spend initially, my profit is up, I'll get a higher EBITDA, etc. And as we were just talking about with hardware, say it's a 100-person business, right? If, 40-50% of your hardware is old, we're asked to look at that, right? And then those 50 machines will come off the price of the business. So one of the common mistakes we see is sweating the assets, making the business ready for sale, to the point it's so cheap, that the ratio of money being spent on IT is not industry sort of ratios, and you're running such old hardware, you're making it sort of risky in terms of updates, etc. So that's probably the number one. I wouldn't say use consultants, even if I am one. Just make sure your MSP is providing service, and that's a very tough thing to say in a sentence, because most people see IT of this type as plumbing, And there's plumbing and making it work, and then there's your data and securing it, and they're the two different mindsets. And I think if you can turn yourself into thinking, I need to protect my customers, you will spend more money to make it more polished. And the thing is, when we walk in the door, if we sense from our right side in, and then one meeting, we can sense where that business is, all to do with the management team's attitude. And if it feels like they haven't invested enough, etc., we will start to build out the costs, and we will have more meetings to learn more about what they did. So as it comes down to it, historical decision making good decisions, investing properly. And I'm not saying proper to the point where you're spending lots of money on redundancy everywhere. I'm basically saying make sure you have very high quality service. Your O2C, order to cash systems are good. If you really want to be at the higher end, look at automation, from your CRM to your to your accounts payable systems, all those type of things. But I do have a list of all of these things that very specific things that we see that I can send you afterwards. So
yeah, that would be great. I would love to include them in the episode. So then I'm going to really wrap up with maybe a thought-provoking question. So then, Hutton, in your experience, like, what's one critical question that executives like Gyner should be asking during technology due diligence, but maybe often overlook? Like, what's that one blind spot that could make or break a successful acquisition from a technology perspective?
Yeah, okay. I think really we've done cyber to death on this, right? So all of it will be there initially. So if I take it another lens and that opportunity piece that we were talking about earlier, I would love to know, that one question is, I'm going to give you 100%, hypothetically 100% more customers tomorrow. What's going to break? What do I need to spend money on? Right? And it's such a multi-layered question because I really want them to be honest. I'm really happy if it breaks something, right? I need to know what that is. And the number one thing I'm trying to find out, especially in services business, is if I increase the customer base by 100%, how much do I have to increase the headcount by? And how much value, so how much value is technology bringing? So it's quite a loaded question because I see them light up. Honestly, I bring that question up and say, imagine your buyer is about to bring 100% by, customers in, and they do light up, which is fantastic. They're passionate about their businesses, but I want to see the different layers of responses. Like I want to think about what could go wrong, what could be good. So.
Yeah, stress testing the infrastructure. So then, Gyner, from your experience leading acquisitions, what's maybe one question you wish you had asked during technology due diligence that could have maybe saved you from unexpected challenges later on, like having a link take you to an unexpected website?
Well, I think what Hutton said, I had never framed it up that way. I think that's the right way to ask that question, which is, and I get where you're poking at, Hutton, which is like, if I doubled your revenue, what would happen to your business today? Right? And, there's a technology piece to that, but there's actually a process piece to that it helps you understand. Because you'll understand that, John is the breaking point of all their invoicing because John does all their invoicing, right? All of a sudden you're like, whoa, okay, I need to know that, right? Because then how I set up their technology and their process, frankly, both, that decision-making piece comes into play. So I think, that question Hutton brought up is very astute. That's really the right question to ask all these owners, right?
Beautiful.
A lot of the other stuff, I use the security vulnerability as really a proxy for things we can fix. The ones that are harder to fix are those process questions like that, right? Because that's where you find out, they're uploading a CSV file every single day to their ERP system to update pricing, and that takes 3 hours, right? And adding more SKUs is going to have it take 6 hours, and then all of a sudden, well, I can't do that. That's too long, right? So you learn things like that all of a sudden with that question that, okay, now I know where we could potentially add value. Also, short term, now I know that I can't double their business or I might break it, right?
Mm.
So it also teaches like what are the guardrails for the growth as you acquire
Mm.
that business.
Yes. There's just a little bit of triangulation there, right, as well, because when they speak to you about you buying their business, they give you the art of the possible and where that growth trajectory is. And all the way through our negotiations, we really want to believe it, but we have to do the diligence. So a question like that can triangulate what are they saying versus some of the data and versus their human reaction. And that's what I love about this job is, as much as I code and AI is fantastic, it's just seeing a human respond to some of these areas. And
Tells you a
one
lot.
little, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one tiny case study of that question is that when we asked that question, there's a little shift, and they had said a little joke, and they said, "Oh, we'll be buying a lot of pizza." And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, well, it takes so long to get people on the system because there's some problems, and they didn't say it in these words, but there were some issues here and here that we actually pay the team overtime and we buy them pizza to onboard customers. And it's like, that hadn't come out in 3 weeks of talking with them. And they were like, okay, and where else is the problem? And they said, well, actually, invoicing, and there you go, right? So that was the real value of tech. DD
Brilliant.
usually is not the technology; it's the processes and the thinking behind it.
Perfect. So I lied. I'm going to ask you a final question because you seem to be really good at, thought-provoking ideas there. So if you could give one piece of advice, you can only give one piece of an advice to an executive such as Gyner, preparing for a technology due diligence in their upcoming acquisition, what would it be? Like, what's the one thing they absolutely must prioritize to avoid future complications?
Oh, that's a good one. I think, that's a tough one. Yeah, because I have a paper on 5 questions that executives must ask. I'll send that, but I think to be fair, I think it's always going to be the cyber aspect. Everything else can be fixed. An executive told me 10 years ago, Hutton, if the P&L is good enough, then the tech is good enough, right? Yeah. And the one thing that I've taught my team is market trumps tech. Tech is quite low in the. Let's be really honest, like low in the diligence streams, but the cyber risk is important, I think, and I think it's really understand. If it was me as an executive, I would like to understand somebody's attitude towards cyber, and the question I would ask. There's only one question I would ask in that scenario: who is ultimately responsible for cyber, and does that person keep documented records?
I love it.
Because if you ask the first question, they'll always say me, but the documented records shows the care.
I love it. We're going through ISO, SOC 2, PCI. I get it. We've put a compliance officer on our executive team to just really take care of that aspect of the business. So that was a great advice, Hutton, because a simple or an overlooked window becomes a big breach, especially when you're doing acquisitions. Hackers are on the lookout for these triggers to really launch their attack. So this is definitely something for all our listeners to take to heart. So a big thank you to you for sharing your expertise and helping us demystify this black box of technology due diligence and M&A. Your insights have been really given at least me a clear understanding of how to maybe navigate this critical part of the acquisition process in a more diligent way. And Gyner, as always, thank you for offering your first-hand experience with real-world examples. That example was, definitely I wouldn't have imagined it. So it's clear that the lessons learned from both sides can make a big difference in ensuring a successful acquisition. So to our listeners, hey, I hope you took a lot of from today's episode and gave you, some tools, some knowledge to better approach the often overlooked areas of technology and M&A. Be on the lookout for some of the questions that I'm going to grab from Hutton. I'll make them available to you so you can start, thinking a lot more critically on some areas that could compromise the deal that you're targeting or you're investigating. So if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with your network, and leave us a review. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights today, and I'll see you around.
Thank you. Thanks,
God
Atif.
bless.